This meant that they fell under the category of dhimmi, and they and their sacred places, including temples, were technically protected under Islamic law. In theory, as long as you pay the tax, you were exempt from military service and were equal to Muslims in society. Of course, in actual practice and reality, things were often quite different. But it is true that generally...
So, hold on a second. You're telling me, because I see so many Muslims in my comments tell me, swear to me that, oh, it was the Muslim conquest. Oh, they treated their conquered people so good. As long as they paid their taxes, they were exempt from draft, and they gave me this whole perception that it was sunshine and rainbows, right? As long as they paid their taxes, you were basically a privileged citizen. Now, I just played devil's advocate, and I just took that face value. But yeah, he said here that in practice was not the case. So basically, I was lied to by my Muslim audience. Okay, this video took me a long time, hour 20 minutes long. Guys, I'll do stuff like this, but you know, in the future, when I get more people on my channel, eventually you'll either have to be a channel member or you'll just have to pay me, because you know, hour 22 minutes. I have things to do. I have a life. Okay, but for now it's okay. But I'm just warning you, because a lot of you guys want me to react to super duper long things, and it's like, you know, okay, for now it's okay, but that fair warning. All right, Zoroastrianism, I think is how you pronounce it.
We all know about Christianity and Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism. These are traditions that have shaped our world to significant degrees and which still have billions of followers worldwide. But one religion that isn't as large today but might still represent one of the most influential and important religious traditions in history is Zoroastrianism. Being associated primarily with Iran and Central Asia and serving essentially as the state religion for some of the great Persian empires, Zoroastrianism also probably had a major influence on certain key features of the Abrahamic faiths. Many have, of course, heard about Zoroastrianism, but knowledge about the details of this religion is often very limited and shallow. People will maybe know that this is the religion that Freddie Mercury belonged to, or that it is a religion that has an essentially dualistic worldview, concerned with the fight of good against evil, light against darkness. This is all true, but there's so much of Zoroastrianism that most people aren't aware of. A long history of development with unique teachings that have, of course, evolved and changed over the centuries and millennia, but the core of which stretches back far into antiquity to some of the earliest religious literature in the history of the world. So in this episode, let's spend some time and dive deep into the fascinating and very important religion of Zoroastrianism.
Since you're new to H&R
Some viewers will perhaps be aware that I have already made an episode like this about Zoroastrianism way back in the very early days of this channel. And while there's not necessarily anything wrong about that episode or anything that I think is bad that I would change necessarily as such, the production value of this channel, the videos here, has significantly increased and gotten better since then. And I feel like an important topic like Zoroastrianism deserves a video that is more pleasing to look at and listen to. Couple that with the fact that both research on this topic generally and my own knowledge of this subject has also significantly increased and developed over the years since that video. So for both of these reasons, I felt that it was necessary, that it was appropriate to do another video about Zoroastrianism that goes even deeper and takes into account all these nuances and new understandings and more complex aspects of its history, development, and teachings. Zoroastrianism is a very old religion. In terms of an organized religion, so to say, it could be considered one of the oldest in the world. And many indeed consider it the first monotheistic religion in history. There are caveats to this, especially the latter statement, as we will see, but for sure it is a...
Okay, this seems like Seems like I'm gonna be learning a lot here, because already I never really thought about that actually. Like, what the heck even were the first religions in the world? Now that I think about it, holy hell. I just kind of, damn, bro. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, huh? What the heck did ancient humans worship before the Abrahamic religions and whatnot? Holy.
A tradition that stretches back very
Never
far
thought that
into the
deep.
past. But for this reason, it has of course evolved and changed over the millennia too, giving rise to different and sometimes competing interpretations of its theology, literature, and practices. Most of the text of the Zoroastrian religion was written down or codified for the first time during the Sasanian Empire, around the middle of the first millennium AD or CE, although these texts had been orally transmitted for a long time before that. It is also around this time, probably in relation to this, that some of the core characteristics of the religion's teachings that we are familiar with became more formally organized and established, a kind of quote-unquote orthodoxy, if you will. What I mean to point out with this is that our common understanding of Zoroastrian belief and practice is often primarily based on these developments during the Sasanian Empire, the codified and sort of official teachings that were set down at this particular period in time. Thus, the teachings that had been established by then is the lens through which much older texts and aspects of the religion, such as the Gathas, are interpreted by most people. In any case, the basic features of Zoroastrianism, as most people know it, is that it is some kind of combination between a monotheistic faith with a dualistic cosmology. The worldview of Zoroastrianism is that of a clear cosmological dualism between the forces of good and evil, between light and darkness, often represented by the forces of Ahura Mazda on the one hand and Angra Mainyu on the other, or between Asha and Druj. We'll return to these terms and concepts later, but this also means that Zoroastrianism is a heavily ethical religion, concerned with the individual's ethical actions in this world, so living according to the principles of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds to promote the forces of Asha, of order and goodness in the world.
Huh. That's actually intriguing, because a thing that Christians like to do to try and prove that God is real, they try to argue morality and good and evil, right? And I'm sure if any of you who are watching this video, some of you may have probably watched those type of like debates where people would debate on religion and whatnot. And what they would do is they would try to point out that what is the point of good and evil if there is no God, right? And usually what they like to say is, well, the whole reason why there's good and evil is because God gave us, I'm trying to simplify this to make you understand this, because some people might not be Christian or know about Christian teachers, but God gave us that instinct. You know how animals just have that built-in instinct, they're just born with that instinct. It's the same thing. Humans have that instinct because God gave us that instinct to know that, yo, this is good and evil, right? That's why Moses got the 10 commandments, okay? Like to make that very, very well clear. So I say this because these people, I mean, they believe in a God. If I'm not mistaken, monotheism is one God, right? Yeah, monotheism, one, yeah, because mono means one and theist means monotheism. So one God or one deity, whatever. Yeah. So that's actually kind of, and not only that, but I did mention how I had a fun theory. I forgot which video I said this in. I had a fun theory where I'm like, I feel like a lot of these religions, if not all of them, may be connected in some way, shape, or form. It's just that the way how these people believe in like their quote unquote God or whatever they worship, it might be like, think of it like this, right? You know how when you're learning a new language and you're learning like the names of countries, typically it's different, right? Like you learn like the names of those countries might be similar, but a lot of the times they can actually be quite different in that language, right? Compared to your native language. But it's the same country. And there's historical reasons for that, right? Think of it like that. I think people this is why I just coined this fun theory. I'm not saying that it's true or anything. I'm just saying maybe due to like, because the earth is huge, and honestly it's very recent until we became globalized. I feel like people may have had, like, everyone may have had some connection to like God. It's just that they interpreted God in extremely different ways, if that makes sense. That's why I feel like, but this is monotheism. I know that there's other religions that are way different, but I'm just saying Zoroastrianism, based on what I hear so far, it kind of just does seem like, based on what I hear, with the whole concept of you have to be ethical, like, good, light, and dark. That's kind of what God, preach. I mean, hell, that's the whole reason why we're on Earth, to be ethical in the first place, right? Because we're gonna get judged based on that, anyways. So really and truly, let's continue. All right.
And also
very interesting.
Promising an afterlife of pleasure or punishment depending on how the person acted during their lifetime.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's hear that. Did they hear that properly? Hold on a second.
And also promising an afterlife of pleasure or punishment depending on how the person acted during their lifetime.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing with Abrahamic religions, quite frankly speaking. Right? It's, again, keep in mind, remember what I said in, well, I forgot what video, but I did point out how, like, for example, the Africans who were slaves that were merely bought by Europeans, at least in my country anyways, they didn't have a problem with converting to Christianity because Christianity was very similar to the religion that they practiced before they were captured by other Africans and turned into slaves, and then were sold off to Europeans when they arrived there. So they had no problem. So I was like, think about that for a second. I mean, think about how far West Africa is from Europe or the Middle East or anything like that, right? Again, that's where I first came up with that theory, right? Because because when I first heard that, I was like, what? I said, what? I said, maybe there is a connection than we would think. It's like Indo-European, right? Think about it. Think about Indo-European language, that whole language. Indo-European, there was a point where the ancestors of Indians and Europeans all spoke like one language. We all know that language should be Indo-European. However, we don't really know much because, obviously so much has been lost to time. But we do know for certain that at one point everyone, at least in what's now Europe and India or parts of India, spoke Indo-European, right? And we have little bits of traces to show that indeed there is a connection with all of the European languages and even Indian language families, that they're all interlinked and it all came from one place, right? Think about that. Think about that logic, but, God, right? God, like, we have these bits of traces and these similarities that are eerily similar, right? Despite how far these people are from each other. Think about it like that, right? It could be like that, really and truly, but so much has been lost to time. Hell, I mean, even the Bible itself says that there's incomplete scriptures that we don't even know about, right? So you have to ask yourself the question, like, what do we not know?
Characteristics of the religion are largely true, although some may need to be nuanced a little bit. But we need to go a little deeper and from different perspectives to get a proper understanding of the complexities of this tradition. I think it might serve us well to, as we often do this in a chronological order. So, with that said, what is the origins or early developments of Zoroastrianism? Well, at the core of Zoroastrian ritual and belief are a set of writings.
Okay.
A group of poems or songs called the Gathas. This, for all intents and purposes, is considered the oldest source and beginning of Zoroastrianism in some way. The Gathas serve as the basis for much of the core teachings of the religion and as an important part of ritual and practical life for Zoroastrians to this day. The Gathas are ascribed to an ancient figure called Zarathustra, sometimes referred to in Greek as Zoroaster, a poet and sage who is considered the original founder, quote-unquote, of Zoroastrianism. Depending on who you ask, Zarathustra is described as a prophet, a poet, sage, a philosopher, or perhaps all of the above, but all agree that if he is a historical person, he is indeed a core figure for the formation and origins of the religion. Scholars both within and outside the Zoroastrian tradition greatly disagree on dating the life of Zarathustra and the Gathas, some placing him at a very early date around the middle of the...
That name Gotha sounds like Gothic. Like, you know, the people at the Goths? Gotha, Gothic. That sounds eerily similar.
The 2nd millennium BC, while others place his life in the middle of the 1st millennium BC, so around the year 500 BC or so, at the very early days of the Achaemenid Empire. Based on the linguistic features of the Gathas themselves, the majority of scholars today, I would say, and I do tend to agree with them, favors the earlier date, thus placing the life of Zarathustra sometime around the year 1500 BC, give or take. This makes his poems or songs, the Gathas, roughly contemporary with the composition of the Rig Veda in the Vedic culture in India, making it some of the oldest religious and philosophical literature in the history of the world. And indeed, this connection is important in other ways too, because the context of early Zoroastrianism is very much connected to the Vedic culture in India. The Indo-Aryan language group that migrated into northern India, which became central to the formation of quote-unquote Hinduism or the Vedic culture, and the Proto-Iranians that migrated to the west share a common origin, both linguistically and culturally, you could say. And we can see this...
Wait. Because those hold on a second. Because some of the regions of what's now northern India, didn't some of these people eventually also migrate to what's now Indo-Europeans? Like some of these people will migrate into what's now Europe, if I'm not mistaken. So if these people are related to Iranian, then wouldn't that also mean that Iranian like this language group here in like Iran, you know, the Iranian language group, I just call it that for simplistic purposes. Wouldn't that also be it would also be related to European languages too, right? Hold on a second. Did I hear that correctly? Hold on a second. Skip this part if you don't want to hear me replay.
Northern India, which became central to the formation of quote-unquote Hinduism or the Vedic culture, and the Proto-Iranians that migrated to the west share a common origin, both linguistically and culturally, you could say. And we can see...
Okay, yeah. So Iranians would have to be also relatives to Europeans as well. Right? Yeah, that would have to be the case.
This in the similarity of many terms and concepts.
Unless I'm missing something. If I am, say so in the comments.
Shared between Zoroastrianism and Indic religion, such as words like Devas, Ashura versus Ahura, Hauma and Soma, etc. So we should imagine Zarathustra growing up and living in a society
I don't know what those words mean.
Like that of the Vedic culture in India. And when we read the Gathas, for instance, I think it's much more fruitful to do that through this particular lens rather than reading it through more of an Abrahamic lens that I think a lot of people tend to do today.
Yeah,
while we aren't sure
fair.
about much of Zarathustra's life at all we have to go on are the many later legends as well as clues in their Gathas themselves. It's widely argued that he was from what is today northeastern Iran.
Planning to move?
Gathas are composed in a language referred to as Old Avestan, and the poems uses imagery and metaphors that point to a society of mobile pastoralism, as there are many references to horses and livestock, including the important notion of the so-called soul of the cow as some kind of cosmic concept. The soul of the cow in the Gathas represents the soul of the world in some way, and Zarathustra talks about the shepherd as an ideal person that takes care of the livestock, and in a similar way, the good person is someone that takes care of the soul of the cow, that is, nature itself and the world at large, as a shepherd would take care of his animals. So Zarathustra figured in a mobile pastoral society with a religious tradition that was probably strongly related to the Vedic one, with a heavy focus on ritual and probably things like sacrifices and offerings, and an essentially polytheistic theology with many different gods or deities. Indeed, it seems that this culture shared certain gods with its neighbors in India, such as Indra and Vayu, among others. Although it's also interesting to consider that the terms for the gods are sort of reversed. So the good gods in India, in the Indic context, are referred to as the Devas, whereas the Ahuras are the bad gods. In the Iranian context, it's reversed. So here, the Ahuras are the good gods, whereas the Devas, as we will see, are a term that refers to evil spirits or evil gods. So in that way, they're reversed. But we can see still that this religious tradition was shared. They share a common ancestry, a common origin, and are very much like each other. Later legends about Zarathustra tell of how he was a priest of this older religion. Thus, he would have been in charge of performing rites and other related things. But as he traveled around the region, he was struck by the violence and unethical behavior of many of the people. Something was wrong, but he wasn't quite sure what it was or how to solve it. This is one of the key themes that we find in the Gathas when we read these texts that are attributed to Zarathustra, that is very much concerned with ethics and pointing out how leaders and people around the world, what was his world, which was, Iran at that time, were sort of corrupted and evil and egotistical, violent, all these things. This is a very common theme in these texts. But then something very dramatic happened, which would change his life and, if it is a historical event, change the course of the world.
I really hope this is not copyrighted. If this is copyrighted, I would have wasted all of my time. Bruh, if this is copyrighted, bro, this would be my last straw. I'm not gonna lie to you, bro.
It is said that during a spring festival, where he might have been working in his function as priest, he went down to the river to fetch some water. But as he was stepping out of the water, he suddenly had an intense vision of light. Then, a shining being referred to as Vohumana, good purpose, spoke to him. Zarathustra was given a kind of revelation, where the truths about reality and its working was revealed to him just as they are. And at the center of this revelation was a quite radical concept. Rather than the more polytheistic religion that he was taught in, it was revealed to him that there is only one creative absolute force and source in reality called Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda is often translated as the Wise Lord or the Lord of Wisdom, and represents one of the key concepts in Zoroastrianism. Ahura Mazda, later often written as Ormazd, is the creative force behind all existence, at least everything good and harmonious in the world. Especially
this literally just sounds like another fancy way of just saying God. It literally just sounds like another way of just saying God.
Later, Ahura Mazda is often seen as somewhat equivalent to the monotheistic God, the sole creator and sustainer of the world.
It literally just sounds like another fancy way of saying God, but okay.
It should be conceived in these earliest sources. Some translators and scholars today, favoring a more quote-unquote philosophical interpretation of the Gathas and the teachings of Zarathustra, such as Ashkdalen, who recently published a translation of the Gathas into Swedish, choose to translate Ahura Mazda as something like the High Wisdom, thus giving it a more abstract philosophical ring compared to the more theological interpretations of Ahura Mazda as a god in the more conventional sense that seemed to have become the norm later on. Whether or not this story about Zarathustra's revelation on the riverbank is historically true or not, it serves as a popular legend about his life that also legitimizes his role as a kind of enlightened sage. but scholars are unsure of just how to categorize Zarathustra. It used to be popular to refer to him as a prophet, thus the prophet of Zoroastrianism, similar to Muhammad being the prophet and founder of Islam. Indeed, many Muslim scholars in history also chose to look at Zarathustra precisely as one of the many prophets sent by God mentioned in the Quran, also thus legitimizing placing the Zoroastrians under the category of the people of the book. And it's
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like the way how it sounds like it doesn't even sound like insane. Sounds like how God approaches people. You know, like both same thing happened with Muhammad, same thing happened with many prophets in the Christian Bible. I mean, this I came in here thinking that this is gonna be something like radically different, but this literally just sounds like just another fancy way of just saying just God. Like, I know I'm saying that a lot, but there is just no other way to put it, really and truly.
It's popular today to talk about him in such a way. But this might be a bit anachronistic in a way, reading his life through an Abrahamic lens, so to say.
Bro, and that's the thing. The thing is I'm not reading it through an Abrahamic lens. I'm not trying to view this in the Abrahamic lens. I'm literally viewing this with an open mind. I'm just saying, based on what I see, this sounds exactly like, let's take a religion like Buddhism, right? Buddhism is nothing like Abrahamic religions at all. Buddhism is, I still don't even understand Buddhism. I tried to understand what the hell Buddhism was about. I tried reading up on it a little bit before. I was like, I do not understand what Buddhism is. I actually asked a long time ago. I asked for someone to try and explain that to me, because I personally couldn't really like understand the whole concept. I don't know. Buddhism is like inner light, like you find inner peace or meditate. I don't even know, man.
Can better be
I don't even know.
compared to the rishis or sages of ancient India that originated the Vedas. Some, as we saw, also choose to categorize him as a philosopher, and this can have a significant impact on how we read the Gathas. I think what we can be most safe in claiming is that he was a poet, or a singer maybe. After all, the one probably direct source that we have of him is the Gathas themselves, a collection of poem songs. So clearly he was some kind of sage poet, blessed with unique insight into the workings of reality and the universe. There is a term in Old Avestan, which is used self-referentially in the Gathas themselves, called a mantran. This means something like a person that uses words like poetry to convey deep existential truths with clarity. I think this, if anything, is perhaps what we can most surely ascribe to Zarathustra, not least because it is a term that he seemingly uses for himself too. The insight that Zarathustra was given about reality, whether through the famous story at the riverbank or not, is what he expresses in the Gathas, and which serves as some of the most key aspects of Zoroastrian thought and belief. The Gathas also serve as the core of the wider corpus of Zoroastrian sacred scriptures known as the Avesta, which, aside from the Gathas, include many other texts, such as the Yashts, or hymns to divine powers, the Vendidad, the Visperad, among many other texts, and these texts are all written in a language group, or groups, known as Old Avestan, which is from roughly 1500 to 1000 BC, and Young Avestan, which is from 1000 BC to around 500 BC. In general, the Zoroastrian scriptures are very varied, and new ones appeared as late as the Islamic period, around the 8th to 9th centuries AD. But the Avesta, the oldest and most important collection of sacred scriptures, which includes the Gathas, make up what we could consider the core of the tradition, and it was only transmitted orally until the first few centuries AD. And while we should remember that Zoroastrianism, just like any religion, is a tradition that changed and evolved over the centuries and millennia, so the religion practiced by Darius, the Achaemenid Emperor, was quite different in many ways from the religion practiced by the Sasanian empires a few centuries later. Still, if we look at these oldest sources and these texts, we might be able to reconstruct a kind of core set of teachings and characteristics that are true, for the most part at least, across the board for most of Zoroastrian history. So with this in mind, what can we say about the teachings of Zoroastrianism? I think we can begin by looking at the scriptures themselves. In fact, the very opening of the first Gatha or song ascribed to Zarathustra, where he says, quote, "In reverence for him with hands outstretched, at first I entreat you all, O Ahura Mazda, for the actions of support of the Spirit Holy through truth, or Asha, through whom you may gratify the intellect of good thought and the soul of the cow. I approach you with good thought, O Mazda Ahura, so that you may grant me the blessings of the two existences, the material and that of thought, the blessings emanating from truth with which you can put your supporters in comfort. I extol you as ever before, O truth, Asha, and good thought, Vuhumana, and Mazda Ahura, for all of whom right-mindedness increases also unfading power. May you come to my cause for support. Inspired by good thoughts and being a witness for Mazda Ahura, I have in mind one soul for his commendation by my song, as well as the rewards for his actions. For as long as I can and I am able, I shall look out in my search for truth." Already in this opening of the Gathas, recited as a key part of the Zoroastrian liturgy, or yasna, we already have some clues to the key teachings of the religion. First of all, there is only one creative force, or God in reality, Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, who is called upon constantly in the text. He is the source of all good, all light, all creation and wisdom. This is why many have referred to Zoroastrianism as essentially monotheistic, or even the first monotheistic religion in the world. But things are also a lot more complicated than that, as we will see. Secondly, what lies at the very core of the Zoroastrian scriptures and teachings is essentially an ethical message. This is the key message that is hammered home again and again. Humans have free will, and there is a very clear idea of right and wrong, of good and evil. Inherent in this ethical message is a very strong dualism. This is not...
Free will is also very much emphasized too within the Bible. Definitely, that's one of the probably the main thing actually. Honestly, about Abrahamic religion is free will. And a lot of people tend to overlook that. A lot. Free will. Like, hello? Well, why isn't God doing anything? I mean, he does, but some people are like that. Why isn't God doing anything? Because he's letting you, he's letting you do it. He's letting you choose. Oh my gosh.
The mind-body dualism of Descartes, or the horizontal dualism of certain strands of Platonism or, say, Christianity, but rather a vertical dualism. All of created reality is divided into truth and falsehood, into right and wrong, light and darkness. Both of the two worlds mentioned in the quote above, that of material and that of thought, are included in this dualism. So it's not a matter versus spirit situation as in Christianity, for example. On the one side, there is Asha, a concept meaning truth, or that which is right, real, or things like order and harmony. This can be compared to the Vedic idea of...
Not gonna lie, I wish that there was a timeline where I would go and try to teach myself some freaking Middle Eastern language. But nah, hell nah, bruh. Hell nah. Because I would never visit a Middle Eastern country anytime soon. That region is way too unstable. No offense, it is what it is. If I ever got a chance to visit one country that I maybe would visit, if it wasn't like, you know, all over the places, Iran. Not really interested in Turkey, to be honest. I've seen a bit of Turkey. Plus, Turkey gets doing the earthquakes, so it's like, ugh, no, thank you. And I know Iran gets earthquakes too, actually, but Syria is also seems interesting as well. Yeah, between Iran and Syria, to be honest. Not Saudi Arabia is certainly interesting to me. Saudi Arabia just seems like a freaking dystopian nightmare. Low key, it's a good country. I'm not saying that like like, I know it's a very stable, prosperous country, mostly because of oil wealth, of course. But it's kind of like America, like Japan, right? Like people be like, "Oh my gosh, Japan is so cool." Japan is, but when you actually look at Japan, it's like a dystopian. Like the society is like very dystopian. Same thing with South Korea, and I would never visit those two countries because of that. Most likely, it's like, ugh. But Saudi Arabia, I mean, actually, I probably would visit Saudi Arabia. I probably would actually. Maybe Saudi Arabia too. But I'm just bringing this up because, or maybe Jordan. Maybe I might. Nah, I'm not interested in Jordan. Jordan has nothing interesting. Like, I need to like your country's history and respect your country enough for me to visit it or want to visit it. Like, Middle East, like the Middle East has a lot of like stuff that probably would be cool as hell for me to learn. But it's the fact that the regions are just so unstable is a problem, really and truly. So it's like damn, I want to avoid it. I know Saudi Arabia is stable as hell, but and even then, it's like, I know Saudi Arabia is too busy engaging in a conflict with Yemen right now, right? With the what the heck was that group called? Was it the Houthis? Pretty sure. So yeah, I think it's the Houthis that launches drones within Saudi territory. I don't want to get hit by a drone, bro. And like the whole like beef with Saudi Arabia and Iran, the whole Middle East Cold War, it's like, yeah, bro. And don't let me get started on that Jewish. Oh my gosh, don't even. Ooh, I meant Hebrew. Oh my gosh, this video's gonna get freaking limited ads now. Great. You get my point. Like, it would be cool maybe if one day, I don't know, maybe go learn maybe like Arabic or something. But yeah, that's like, no, I there's not a good enough reason to, even if I find the region to be interesting. The main reason why I wouldn't do that is simply because the region's just too unstable, quite frankly speaking. Like, for example, right, like Russian, for example. Russian is like, Russia isn't really unstable. Sure, it's in a conflict with Ukraine, but Russia isn't like unstable or anything. So it's like, okay, yeah, that's more understandable, like that's why I was like, but if Russia was completely unstable, I'd be like, yeah, no, I'm not going near there at all. Plus, Russia's society isn't like dystopian, like, right? Really and truly. But I do respect I do respect Saudi Arabia, though. I actually respect Saudi Arabia for being a very prosperous Middle Eastern country. I feel like, it's like the country to set an example for every other country around it. I do like that about Saudi Arabia. I do respect that about Saudi Arabia. I think that's quite cool. But anyways, that's why I wouldn't really set foot near that region anytime soon, quite frankly speaking. No hard feelings, but unfortunately, it is quite unfortunate because I know that region is so rich with history, but it's like the way how things are right now. It's like, that's just how it is.
Ruta, or perhaps even Ma'at in ancient Egyptian religion. The creation of Ahura Mazda is essentially good, beautiful, and harmonious. It is perfect because Ahura Mazda himself is perfect and good. Asha, or truth, is the principle of that goodness and order in the world, the way things are supposed to be, according to the wisdom of Ahura Mazda. But on the other side of the coin, there is also Druj, which means the lie or deception. This is the very opposite of Asha. It is conceived, at least in later...
How the hell do people roll their R's? Druj. Is that... Druj. 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 How do people roll their R's? I do not.
Zoroastrianism,
Oh my,
as a
I've been
force
trying to
that
roll
has
my
been
R's. I just
introduced
cannot.
to the perfect creation of Ahura Mazda from the outside, so to say.
Drush,
And the
drush.
human being and all of creation is caught in this place that contains both good, the domain of Ahura Mazda and Asha, and evil, that of Druj and its forces. So our world of creation contains both good and evil, at least in this current state. Forces or concepts are often also personified in different ways, especially as we get into the younger Avesta and later Zoroastrian writings. In the Gathas themselves, it isn't always entirely clear how we should think of these concepts. Some readings by scholars such as John Kellens and the aforementioned Ashk-Dalen see much of these things as simply psychological and internal concepts and workings within the human person. The creation of Ahura Mazda is essentially good in its totality, but within the human soul there exist inclinations in two directions. On the one hand, there is spenta mainu, often translated as beneficent inspiration or beneficent spirit, which leads you to work for the benefit of Asha and goodness, and almost as a kind of faculty of Ahura Mazda. And on the other hand, there is angra mainu, the destructive spirit, that inclines to evil, deception, and destruction.
That sounds like the word angry. Angra. Angra. Ugh, I'm trying to roll my R's. Angra. Angra. I wish I grew up in a country that rolled their freaking R's, bro. Because a lot of these freaking languages, so you have to know how to roll the R. It's like, dude, if you don't know how to roll a freaking R, it like makes or breaks your pronunciation in these languages. And it's like, why?
However, this oldest text should be interpreted.
But that word does look like angry, though. I wonder if that word has some type of relative to the word angry, cognate, or whatever.
Later Zoroastrian writings and teachings have a more cosmological perspective on this dualism. Ahura Mazda is the one creator god of the cosmos whose creation is perfect and good. And Angra Mainyu becomes a kind of personified spirit himself as the opposite of Ahura Mazda, the force in reality that has infiltrated the perfect creation of Ahura Mazda to spread druj, lies and deception, things like violence, death, and decay. So the world we live in today is one in which both of these forces, Asha and druj, represented to some degree by Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu respectively, are at work simultaneously. And it is our work, our job as human beings, to choose the path of Asha, of truth and order, and to dispel the darkness of Druj from the world.
That is, I will say that's quite different. That's quite different from the way how evil is portrayed. A little bit different, because evil in Abrahamic religion is kind of just like, okay, yeah, the devil used to be an angel. He tried to rebel against God, tried to take God's place, he got defeated. Now God is basically just like, okay, yeah, you tried to do that on me, but you know what? I'm gonna let you go and tempt these people and see, you know, how ethical they are. Boom. In a nutshell, right? Give them free will, let you tempt them and see how ethical they are. Then when I'm done, I'm gonna destroy all you people. You know, it's funny because I actually asked my brother about that. I was curious about this. I actually made a good point. I actually mentioned my brother here before. He was supposed to come on this channel, but God knows when he's gonna come on this channel. But I keep talking to him about it all the freaking time. He's like, eventually, I will try and get time to come on the channel. Eventually. But I was like, yo, why would the devil like try to like, if the devil knows that he's gonna be destroyed or whatever in the end, like why is he doing all this in the end? Like what was the whole point of that? It was a long time ago. He's just like, well, simple. Taking everybody down with you. If I'm going now, you're going now. I honestly, you know, the more I think about it like that, the more I'm just like, huh. That does make a lot of sense, actually.
In the Gathas, Zarathustra talks a lot about the shepherd as a kind of ideal person, one who takes care of the livestock and of nature, as the image of the person who follows the path of Asha. This he compares to people who instead are misled by the devas, the evil gods or deities, to seek power, money, or destroy the world.
that name Devas sounds like deity. That name might be cognate with the word deity. Because deity, some people pronounce it as deity, but some people pronounce it as deity. That word might be cognate.
World in different ways through.
Might have some relationship with that.
So you see what
We
I
don't
mean when
know
I say that
about.
the Zoroastrian message is an essentially ethical one. This fight between good and evil, between truth and deception, Asha and Druj, is the very core of the religion and the Avestan scriptures. And the human being promotes Asha partly through performing the Zoroastrian rituals, of course, such as the Yasna liturgy or the daily prayers, etc. But on a more personal, practical level, this is done by adhering to the main, you could say the main mantra or instruction that people are to follow. Humata, Hukta, Vareshta, which means good thoughts, good words, and good deeds.
Oh, hell no. What the
It's
hell?
a pretty neat and simple instruction, but this also, of course, requires knowing what makes up good deeds, for instance, by being able to identify which aspects of the world are part of the good creation of Ahura
I
Mazda.
wasn't saying hell no to that. I was saying hell no to the words. Like, is that how that language is like? They like combine like, oh nah, bro. Oh hell nah, bro.
And which-
Like they like combine like one word into a whole phrase. Oh hell nah, bro. Ah hell nah. I mean, maybe it's not as hard as it looks to my English brain, but no. Ugh.
Out of Angra Mainyu. So there are certain things in the world that are seen as pure and sacred, such as fire and running water, that must not be defiled in any way. At the same time,
What?
there are certain things in the world, like some animals seen as impure or evil. This includes snakes and
Of course.
frogs and things like this. And it is sort of encouraged
Frogs?
that you are supposed to kill these animals of evil to promote Asha in the world.
What in the world? What did frogs do? Snakes? Okay, yeah, okay. Frogs? What did frogs do? Poor frogs, bro. Oh my gosh. But funny enough, actually, that legit just unlocked a memory. Holy crap! From when I was like a kid in Barbados. So my mother, she's like religious, very religious, super religious. And I remember growing up as a kid in our old house, there was a frog. We saw a frog, a toad, one of those things. And she was like, oh, hell nah. She's like, oh, nah, that's a demon. I'm not even kidding. Not, she's one of those type of people. Not even kidding. She's like, nah, that's a demon. Like, she's superstitious, bro. Like, superstitious. Because the country that she grew up in, St. Lucia, is like that. Like, I mentioned in my, like, Crusader reactions, I'm like, bro, you'd think that people aren't, like, you know the way how the Crusaders are? Like, you think, oh, okay, that was in the past. Nah, bro, that mindset very much still exists within some, like, Caribbean islands, bro. Not even kidding. It's a product of European colonization and assimilation. Like, that was just something that they just, adopted, right? Yeah, that whole, like, religious thing, that's still prevalent. Anyways, but I'm bringing that because it's relevant, bro. So she's like, yeah, no, that's a demon. She's like, we gotta kill it. I'm like, huh? She's like, yeah, we gotta kill it, bro. But it wasn't like, oh, we need to kill it. No. She was like, we need to take salt or something like that to kill it. It was bizarre. I think, was it a frog or was it a snail? I cannot remember. It was, oh crap, I think my memory's starting to. No, I think it was a frog. She was like, we need to put salt with hot water and get that frog in there to kill it, to get the demons out. Something like that. Is that a frog? or the snail. And long story short, oh yeah, she killed it.
The goal of the Zoroastrian is thus to live his or her life in accordance with Asha or truth, to devote themselves to Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom or High Wisdom, and to worship him and the goodness that he represents in thought, speech, and action. The person who has accomplished this, who adheres to Asha in their life, is known as an Ashavan, thus representing this ultimate goal of the human being. This stands in contrast to the Dregvant, the follower of Druj, who spreads evil and falsehood in the world. In the Gathas, Zarathustra says, quote, I replied, firstly, I am Zarathustra, a veritable opponent of the evildoer, but a powerful friend of the good am I. So long as I can sing my songs of praise for thee, O Mazda, so long shall I strive to enlighten and awaken all to the realization of thy eternal dominion. And this also figures into the large cosmogonical and eschatological picture as well, especially if we take into account later Zoroastrian writings too, such as the important and fascinating Vidabdad. This is a young Avestan text from around 1100 to 500 BC. Here, there's a clear account of sacred history that is presented. It begins with the creation of the world by Ahura Mazda as a perfect creation. This wonderful situation lasts for a while, often sometimes considered 6,000 years, before the evil spirit Angra Mainyu sort of infiltrates or infects this perfect world, spreading Druj and creating the situation that we have now, a world of both good and evil. This fight between good and evil continues, but reaches a kind of turning point with the life and, you could say, mission of Zarathustra himself and the establishment of Zoroastrian rituals and worldview that sort of starts the process of Asha's victory over Druj, the gradual victory of light over darkness. In the end, and connected with the arrival of a savior figure called the Seoshant, the world will be revitalized at last, an event or concept called Freshukareti. This word is connected, as you can probably hear, with the English word fresh. And we can thus kind of imagine it as the world becoming fresh again. The darkness of Angra Mainyu and Druj finally being dispelled, and the creation of Ahura Mazda once again being able to be what it was from the beginning, a perfect world of harmony and order.
So there are indeed relationships between some of these words and English. Oh, that's cool.
The Zoroastrian scriptures also imagine, because of its strongly ethical nature of course, that the individual human being will also face a kind of retribution here. After the world is redeemed, every human being will be judged based on their actions in life. This was quite unique at this time.
Here's what you can expect to pay for your tax.
Our ethical actions affect our afterlife directly, rather than things like status or other features that were more common in other traditions, so including the ancient Iranian religion. The Ashavan, the person who has followed and promoted Asha in their life, will live a pleasant life in the company of Ahura Mazda in this perfect world. Whereas the Dregvant, who promoted deception and evil in the world, he will be punished and face a very unpleasant afterlife in a place called the House of Lies. It is taught that at this point, the dead person will be forced to walk across a bridge. On the other side is paradise for all intents and purposes, but on the bottom below the bridge is the House of Lies, what can essentially be considered hell. For the Ashavan or righteous person, this bridge will be very wide and easy to cross. But for a quote-unquote bad person, the bridge will contract to be as thin as the edge of a blade, making it almost impossible to cross and causing the person to basically inevitably fall down into eternal punishment. Zarathustra says, quote, the Karpans, priests, and the Kavis, so worldly leaders, have tyrannized over humanity. Their evil actions are destructive of life. Verily, the conscience of such a one shall torment his soul. And thus, when they shall come to the bridge of judgment, their abode for endless ages shall be in the house of the lie. For those of you that are familiar with the Abrahamic faiths, a lot of this will of course feel right at home, because these features are basically identical to certain eschatological beliefs in religions like, particularly in Islam and Christianity.
Yeah, that's what I already pointed out.
Similarities and possible connections later on in the episode too. At this point, I think it is also worthwhile to discuss more in detail the theology at play here, because it can be a little complicated. Like we said, Zoroastrianism is often called the first monotheistic religion in the world, and this isn't without reason. Indeed, as we saw, the Gathas and Avestan scriptures consider Ahura Mazda to be the one creator of the world. As far as we consider a god, with a capital G, Ahura Mazda is it, and no one compares with him. But things aren't really this simple and neat, especially if we try to look at it and define monotheism through the lens of the Abrahamic religions and the kind of monotheism that we find in, say, Judaism or Islam. First of all, we have already been introduced to the concept of Angra Mainyu, the evil spirit that stands on the, you could say, the opposite end of Ahura Mazda as a kind of spirit of darkness and evil. Doesn't this kind of paint the picture of two gods with opposing qualities? The relationship between Angra Mainyu and Ahura Mazda changed according to different theologies and developments across the centuries and millennia, and sometimes they do indeed seem to be equal in some ways, such as with the so-called Zurvanite movement during the Sasanian Empire, when the two basically became seen as two sons of an even higher divine figure called Zurvan, or Time. On the other hand, in the Gathas themselves, one could interpret it in a very different way, where Ahura Mazda is the one god, and Angra Mainyu is only a personification of some other force that exists in creation, either ontologically or simply in the human psyche. Secondly, and this is even more confusing to some, while Ahura Mazda is the one creator god and the highest lord in reality, on his side, we also find other divine forces or concepts such as the Amesha Spentas and the Yazadas. The Amesha Spentas, the holy immortals, is a concept that we find already in the Gathas themselves, even though this term isn't used there. And here, they appear as certain, you could say, attributes or manifestations. Perhaps, to use philosophical language, you can see them as emanations of Ahura Mazda that are manifested in the world and in human actions in different ways. The scholar Jenny Rose says, quote, "The Gathas introduced the notion that the Ashavan should further certain qualities besides Asha that are associated with promoting the best existence. This leads to the consideration that these may be separate entities, which, along with other abstract forces found in the Gathas, form part of a complex web of interrelationships with Ahura Mazda." So these Amesha Spentas are qualities of Ahura Mazda that should be embodied by the person as part of that goodness and wisdom that make up God and his creation. In the Gathas, there is no set number for these Amesha Spentas, but in later writings they are defined as 7. Asha, or truth, is one of them, as is Spenta Mainyu, which we mentioned earlier. This is translated as beneficent inspiration or beneficent spirit. There is Vohumana, good thought or good purpose. There is Kshatra Vairya, dominion. Armaiti, holy devotion or love. There's Haurvatat, wholeness or perfection, and Ameritat, or immortality. While in the Gathas themselves, these can be read as emanations or aspects of Ahura Mazda in some way, in later periods they often became seen as figures or spirits in themselves. Spenta Mainyu was usually identified outright with Ahura Mazda himself, whereas the rest were often individual divine entities that were also often the object of worship in different ways. Each of them would also be associated with certain aspects of the natural world or other abstract concepts, so that Asha, for instance, was associated with fire, and devotion to this Amesha Spenta Asha was through fire, so to say. This can be a pretty complicated idea and definitely complicates the theology, especially if we're looking for a more strict monotheism in the Abrahamic sense. And furthermore, these Amesha Spentas, and even Ahura Mazda himself, was also seen as part of a wider group of beings called the Yazatas, which literally means those worthy of worship. The Yazadas are divine beings that can be worshipped, and also include other popular divine entities such as Mithra and Anahita, among others. So what's going on here? If there are...
I mean, that Loki sounds like the Trinity. Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. It kind of sounds like the Trinity, because there's, like in Christianity anyways, I'm just trying to parallel. Again, I'm just reading this, watching this with an open mind. Christianity, God is like the ultimate God, but Christians also worship Jesus too, right? And they worship the fire of the Holy Ghost, right? So, again, simply drawing parallels, right?
Multiple gods that are worshipped.
But
What role does Ahura Mazda actually play?
yeah, this is the thing. It's like, if what he's saying is true, and keep in mind, history is one of those things where you might think you know something, but it turns out that that's not the case. If what he's saying is true, then it's like, although I do see people saying Jesus is God, but they don't say that Jesus is a different God. Ew. I don't know. Maybe Zoroastrian could have been like that, and we just don't know it. Who knows? Like, maybe Zoroastrian could have had some type of trinity that we just don't know about because we just don't know the details, But I'm saying, what is saying true, then is like, that's a stark difference right there.
Can we then actually call this a monotheism?
Yeah.
This is pretty complicated, as you can see. I'm usually careful to use terms like monotheism because it can become quite anachronistic to use it in this way and thus project certain expectations from a completely different context onto something that really doesn't fit. For sure, the Azadas were the object of worship for Zoroastrian throughout history, but not everyone wants to call them gods necessarily. Some have referred to them as something akin to angels in the Abrahamic situation. Indeed, the term Yazada seems to be used for a wide array of different things, such as everything from healing plants to fravashis too. This is a concept that we will return to later. So Yazadas can mean a broader category of things that are worthy of worship, which can include natural things, but also the Amesha Spentas, and it can also sometimes even include Ahura Mazda himself, although he is usually sort of considered as above or transcendent of all these other categories. Some might perhaps be tempted to use a term like henotheism to describe it, where multiple gods are recognized as existing, but only one god being exalted and worshipped as the sort of highest god in existence. But again,
okay. I actually mentioned this. but I didn't know the term for it. I mentioned how low key. And it's confusing because the way how English is, it's like Christianity could be henotheism. Kind of. Or theoretically, if I make a theory, I was actually talking with my mother about this. I was like, God is the most high God. If you pay attention to what the Bible says, right? The Bible says God is the most high God, right? Like higher than what? Right? When you interpret that, like what is he higher than? Right? And when you think about these other religions and whatnot, when I was talking with my mother about this, she said, and this is her words, not mine, she said, those gods they're not the most high God, but they're like below God, like some of the religions. How do I explain this? Is like there's other entities, I guess, that truly does exist that people worship. The issue is that they worship them as the most high God, when the Bible states who is the most high God, right? So that made me, and even watching this video, I was actually thinking about that throughout this whole video in my head. I was like, maybe Christianity might be henotheism, but we don't know, right? And I say, and I could honestly say that because, again, remember, there's like incomplete scriptures of things that we don't know about, right? And this goes back to my theory of all these other cultures and places far away across the world who sounds like they're worshiping a completely different god or entity or whatnot, but there's a lot of eerily similar things when you dig deep within their so-called far away religion, right? So it's like, you know, I mean, hey guys, just think about that for a second, right? Like don't just come in here with a completely, you know, closed off mindset. Really and truly, you know.
Again,
Let's continue.
This is a sort of anachronistic way of looking at it. It's trying to fit something into our preconceived categories and boxes, whereas this is it's more complicated than that, right? This is a completely different way of looking at the relationship between these different divine beings and how the cosmos functions in that way. I think while it can be helpful to use these terms and to discuss them like we are now, monotheism or henotheism or whatever you want to have it, I think that at the end of the day, the best way to do this is simply to look at it for what it is, right? We look at this as a unique case in itself. The Zoroastrian theology is unique, right? They have this high god, this somewhat monotheistic idea, right? That Ahura Mazda is the one god, but there are other divine beings too. And it's not like Ahura Mazda is one among the same category of divine beings, and that he is just exalted above the other, as in other henotheisms, perhaps. Ahura Mazda seems to be in a sort of a category of his own completely. He is God with a capital G, whereas the others are divine beings, maybe not even gods. Many people will not even want to call them gods. They call them
entities. That's why I was saying entities. Literally entities.
Or simply divine beings, or in the case of scholars in many textbooks, they will just use the Western term yazadas, which I think is pretty wise, right? Because it avoids many of these problems that we run into.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And a lot of people don't really know this. Is like people like the word like God, people, it's like the way how English is, dude. It's weird. This is why when I say like there's quote unquote other gods, like I'm not saying that there's other high gods, like no, I'm saying there's other like entities, if that made sense, that these people are worshiping as the most high god. Because remember, what does the Bible say about God? And I know you're in probably Islam, and some of you are Islam, but still pay attention to what the Bible says carefully. God is the most high God. Why is it worded like that? Why is it worded like that? You have to ask yourself, why is it worded like that, right? Because if God was like, if there was no other like divine entities, right? Then it should have just been like, God is God. God is God, that's it. Plain and simple. Maybe it could have been in translation. Maybe it could have been. I'm just saying, just pay attention to the way how it's worded. Because that's the thing about the Bible is you really, really need to pay attention, or you'll miss a whole bunch of detail from barely just glossing over some stuff. I actually have to go back and reread the Bible again, because I feel like there's so much details that I am personally missing from the Bible myself.
By using terms like gods or deities. So maybe we should do that too. Simply call them for what they are, which is the Yazadas. And Ahura Mazda is his sort of own category. I don't know. It's a complicated situation, but I think that's worth keeping in mind all of these aspects and things when we discuss this topic. Like I said, the Yazadas, including the Ameshaspentas, are an integral part of the religion since the earliest period, and significantly nuances our understanding and reminds us not to oversimplify based on our preconceived categories. It should be pointed out also that some have argued that the idea of the Yazadas and the Ameshaspentas, at least as separate entities, is a later invention of the religion that is not present in the Gothists themselves, but that, of course, isn't for us to decide here. What we should remember is that the teachings of the religion, including this topic, changed and evolved over time, making it hard to pin it down into a set doctrine, so to say, at least until much later in history. So, in summary, Zoroastrianism, at least in the Avesta scriptures, teaches that there is a cosmic drama. Created reality is a vertical dualism, divided between the two forces. On the one hand, there is Asha, ruled over by the one good god Ahura Mazda and represented by his Ameshaspentas and the various Yasadas. And on the other hand, there is Druj, deception, ruled over by Angra Mainyu and represented by him and the other evil gods or spirit referred to as Devas. The role of the human being is to worship Ahura Mazda and to become an Ashavan, one who follows and spreads Asha through ritual action and adhering to the principles of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. By doing so, we are gradually removing the stain of darkness and evil from the world until we reach Freshukareti, when the world will once again be perfect and where human beings will be resurrected, judged based on their actions, and then spend the rest of eternity in either pain or pleasure. This, in essence, with some clarifications and additions from later institutionalized theology, can be seen as what Jenny Rawls refers to as the Avestan worldview, which lies at the center of Zoroastrianism.
I like these mountains. Very nice. I swear, if this is copyright, I am going to lose my mind. I want to skip. I really think I should skip this copyrighted stuff, bro. I like... Bro, I'm gonna...
Zarathustra, the probable author of the Gathas and the founder of
this is copyright, bro.
Proved to be a very influential figure in the history of religion and philosophy, perhaps one of the most significant in all of history. But during his lifetime, this wasn't necessarily the case at all. We find references in the Gathas to the idea that he was shunned and rejected by people of eastern Iran as he traveled around. But he did find one supporter in the ruler Vishtaspa and his queen Hutausa, who became his patrons and seemed to have adapted his religious reform. Whatever was the case, when other historical records start showing up around a millennium later, after Zarathustra lived, it becomes clear that his writings and teachings had become very widespread across Greater Iran. While we should be careful to think about it as a unified quote-unquote religion as we think of it today, it's clear that some form of developing Zoroastrianism was being practiced by a large swath of the Iranian population and would become central to the Great Persian or Iranian empires, such as the Achaemenids, the Parthians, and the Sasanians. So to move on chronologically then, let's talk about the famous Persian Empire, the Achaemenids. Did the Achaemenids practice Zoroastrianism? Well, the short answer is yes. We have to remember, and I hammer this down so much because it is important to remember, that Zoroastrianism was always evolving and changing, and at this relatively early stage, we can't think of Zoroastrianism as a institutionalized religion with clearly delineated doctrines and borders. But when we look at the sources, both internal ones, such as documents or rock inscriptions, as well as outside sources, such as from the Greeks, we can clearly see that the Achaemenid rulers adhere to a version of that Avestan worldview that we mentioned earlier. Many names of royals and officials carry names related to Zoroastrian scriptures and ideas, and the emperors like Darius saw themselves as playing an important role in this cosmic drama of representing the wisdom and authority of Ahura Mazda and Asha on earth against its enemies. In the inscription at Pistun, Darius I makes clear his devotion to the god and what this means. Quote, "By the grace of Ahura Mazda am I king. Ahura Mazda has granted me the kingdom." And, quote, "A great God is Ahura Mazda, who created this excellent thing which is seen, who created happiness for man, who set wisdom and capability down upon King Darius." King Darius says, "By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I am of such a sort. I am a friend of the right. Of wrong, I am not a friend. It is not my wish that the weak should have harm done him by the strong, nor is it my wish that the strong should have harm done him by the weak. The right, that is my desire. To the man who is a follower of the lie, I am no friend." In other words, he's clearly placing himself within the Avestan worldview and ethical framework. And this can be said to be true generally for the Achaemenids. In fact, we see in the Achaemenid period a few of the most prominent features of Zoroastrianism for the first time. So what did Zoroastrianism actually look like on the ground during this period? Well, if you're looking for a neat and simple to grasp answer, you won't find it here. In general, it seems that
That's cool though. We get to learn a little bit of what life was like in the Achaemenid Empire. The Alexander the Great conquer. That's really cool.
Zoroastrian
That's really
worship,
awesome.
for the most part, took place outside, rather than in temples or other dedicated buildings. Worship was, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, directed at certain natural elements such as fire, water, and wind, and rituals could be performed on mountaintops or other places in nature. As we saw, Ahura Mazda was still seen as the high god who creates and sustains the universe. But worship on the ground often focused on these other forces in the form of Ameshaspentas or Yazadas, the divine beings worthy of worship and who were associated with natural phenomena. As you probably know, one of the things most strongly associated with Zoroastrianism is a reverence for fire. And this starts to become visible for the first time here in the Achaemenid period, where fire, along with water, seems to have been a particularly strong focus of reverence. Fire, along with running water, was seen as pure and represented the light of Ahura Mazda and Asha, a pure expression of that good aspect of the world that we are all to aim for in our lives. Many, including later Muslim critics, have often called Zoroastrians fire worshippers in a derogatory way, but this thus needs to be clarified and nuanced. The fire is turned to as a symbol and expression of light, of goodness, and by extension of Ahura Mazda. While we don't find any examples of fire temples in this period, which would become so prominent in later periods, there are examples of sacred fires that were kept perpetually burning as an important part of ritual or worship in some way. Indeed, on rock carvings, one of the most prominent themes is often a three-part image of the king standing in front of a burning fire altar, and above both of them is the famous figure called the Fravashi, which we'll return to later. In other words, two of the most prominent and famous symbols of Zoroastrianism have thus emerged. And this seems to have pointed to a kind of three-part vision of authority in the world, right? The king represents Ahura Mazda in the world, his authority, and the sort of spreading of Asha in the world. The fire also represents divinity and light and goodness and Asha in some way. And then the Fravashi above also has a very significant meaning and symbolism, again, which we'll return to later because it's pretty complicated. Sometimes it's thought to represent Ahura Mazda himself, but this isn't entirely sure. But these three sort of symbols were very important at this time, and particularly the latter two, the fire and the Fravashi, has remained sort of key symbols for the religion till this very day. We are pretty sure that fire served a ritual function already at this time, because there are mentions of something called Atarvaksha, or guardians of fire, as some kind of important functionaries in the religion. In general, it is also in the Achaemenid period that we also see the appearance of the main religious experts of Zoroastrianism, what we could call the Zoroastrian priests, which are called magi. These magi would become very famous across the ancient world, and among other things, they probably show up in the Gospel of Matthew as the three magi or wise men that bring gifts to baby Jesus. It is also from the word magi that we get terms like magic, as these figures became associated outside of Iran with things like astrology and different kinds of, what we would refer to as magic, even if this wasn't always necessarily an accurate association. But
I can hear all the zodiac. Ugh, those basic white girls and their astrology. Ugh. But black magic. Let's talk about magic. Black magic. Oh my goodness, dude. Going back to my mother again, dude. She still does this. She was like, always told me about black magic. Dude. The stories from her country, bro. Dude. So apparently, like, black magic is practiced a lot over there. The stories, bro, that I've heard. I never been there. I haven't been there yet. Because some of my family lives, no, most, like, half my family lives there. Like, a good chunk of my family lives there. So eventually I will live there. But, bro, apparently, like, it's crazy. It's like, she told me like some of the stuff. I'm not gonna talk about it now. Maybe like in a different video. because I want to say some of my juicy stuff, or I don't want to like review everything all at once. But bro, I will say one story though. If you made it this far, I'll probably bring the story later, but in my other like religious video. But my brother, who was supposed to come on this channel and talk about this whole religion stuff and all that, he told me when he was there in my mom's country, he was walking down the road in a neighborhood or whatever, and he said he saw a freaking coffin. He said he just saw a coffin like in the middle of the road. And keep in mind, he was aware. Like my mom also told him, obviously, like the amount of freaking black magic and stuff that they practice and all that. Bro, this dude legit said, he was like, yo, I was like walking down the road in that neighborhood. I saw that coffin in the middle of the road. Bro was like, yeah, I just went and turned around. Bro just changed his plans and just turned around. Because why the hell do you have a coffin in the middle of a road? And keep in mind, you're in a place that does a load of black magic, bro. You turn around immediately. Oh my goodness, bro! I gotta ask him about that story again. If I bring him on his channel, I'll probably ask him to tell him that story in like more detail. But that was like a summary of the story. That story is hilarious as well, bro. But that just reminded me of that. Let's continue.
The appearance of the Magi tell us some important things. We mentioned that, at least in the early Achaemenid period, worship took place outside and was directed at natural forces and the yazadas that were associated with them. Well, these yazadas, or divine beings, really was a key aspect of religious practice in this period. Fire and water were important points of reverence, and these forces were associated with particular divine beings. And the two most popular in this period were Mithra and Anahita. Mithra was associated with the sun, and thus to some degree with fire, even though fire often had symbolized something even higher than any of the individual yazadas, but still, Mithra was important, and Anahita was a yazada that was primarily associated with water. The cult of these two divine figures, especially in the later Achaemenid period, became very prominent, and there even started appearing temples dedicated to them, where the Magi would work as functionaries in these temples. The Persians had been famous from outside as having a religion that didn't have any images. Ahura Mazda was never depicted, unless the Fravashi was supposed to symbolize him, and other forces were often rather associated, as we said, with natural forces or abstract concepts rather than images or statues and things like this. But in this later period of the Achaemenid Empire, perhaps because of influence from the outside, such as from Greece or Babylon maybe, we do start to see images of the yazadas in these temples too. Not to mention the fact that when the Persian emperors conquered new territories, such as Egypt, they sometimes adopted worship of the local gods in these regions too. Was this a political move? For sure, but it also shows that quote-unquote Zoroastrianism in this period was quite complicated and chaotic, and it didn't really have the defined borders that it would gain much later in history. Even if the rulers and population of Iran generally held to the so-called Avestan worldview and some of the basics of the Avestan teachings, this is still true to some degree. So then, did the Achaemenids practice Zoroastrianism? Again, the short answer is yes, but as I've hopefully shown, there's a significant amount of nuance and complexity to be added to that answer if we want to understand the situation more properly. But with that said, this is of course a very important period for the wider development of Zoroastrianism. However, the Yazatas or Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu were supposed to be interpreted in the Gathas and the older text. At this point, it becomes pretty clear that they are viewed as akin to what we could call gods or spirits in a theological sense. And by this time, it appears that the very strong dualistic worldview had been firmly established, as we can see from outside sources writing about the religion of the Persians. Even Aristotle himself describes the Zoroastrian dualistic doctrines. According to Diogenes Laertius in the Lives of the Philosophers, he says, quote, Aristotle, in the first book of his work on philosophy, says that the Magi are more ancient than the Chaldeans, and that they have two principles, a good spirit and an evil spirit. The former is called Zeus and Ahura the latter Hades and Arimaneus. And Zoroastrianism continued to play a role even after the fall of the Achaemenids to Alexander the Great and during the later Parthian Empire, which lasted between 247 BC to around 224 AD. During the later Sasanian Empire, this period, the Parthians, was often seen as one where the practice and devotion of Zoroastrianism was relatively abandoned or that it stagnated until they, so the Sasanians, sort of revived it again and brought it back to its former glory. But looking at the historical record, this doesn't seem entirely true. The Parthian period did see a lot of contact with cultures outside Iran, not least the Hellenic world as well as India, and religious practice, including Zoroastrianism, was impacted by this environment in different ways. For example, the increased contact with religious traditions from Greece and things like Buddhism in India might be one of the reasons that we seem to see an increase in things like images and icons of the Yazaras as a focus of worship. Both the Greeks and the Indians loved to depict their deities with images of different sorts, whereas the earlier Zoroastrian practice had been without images and a focus on worshipping outside. And even though, as we saw, we do seem to find a few examples of images in the later Achaemenid period, this seems to flourish even more in the Parthian age. Very significantly, it is also during the Parthian period that we see the emergence of fire temples, Atashka, sometimes large complexes dedicated to fire and magi or priests that would tend to the fire as well as make offerings to it, including animal sacrifice during the very important Yasna liturgy. So in the Parthian period, aside from individual practices, the religious cult was focused on two kinds of sacred buildings, the fire temples and the individual temples dedicated to Yazaras, which would often include images, as we saw. We should also mention that during the Parthian period, an attempt seems to have been made to write down and preserve the old scriptures of the Avesta, which had been scattered and the oral tradition taking a hit with the invasion of Alexander, of course. This collection and writing down of scripture and its exegesis is attributed to the reign of Valakhsh the Ashkanian, or Vologases, who ruled between 51 to 78 AD. But this process of canonizing Zoroastrian scriptures and creating something close to an quote-unquote orthodoxy, clearly defining the religion and its principles, really started most properly to happen under the Sasanians, who ruled Iran between around 224 to 652 AD. It was during the Sasanian dynasty that Zoroastrianism reached the peak of its power and prestige in a way. Because it is here that the religious experts and kings put a huge emphasis on establishing a strong Zoroastrian religion that can stand up against its rivals in the region and serve as a solid foundation for the empire. To fully grasp what is happening here, we need to consider the context. By the time the Sasanians came to power, some significant things had happened in the Middle East which shaped its religious and philosophical landscape. Not least, of course, the birth and increasing popularity of religions like Christianity and Manichaeism, religions that are heavily scriptural in nature and with a very clear delimited set of doctrines and practices and orthodoxy based on those scriptures. Although this is relative, of course, since Christianity at this time was also incredibly diverse with many different schools and with different scriptures and interpretations of scriptures. But in general, the Zoroastrians and the Sasanians
still is
faced with an enemy and with other religions that were very heavily scriptural and with a very sort of clear, again, relatively orthodoxy and beliefs based on those scriptures. And especially after the events of the 4th century, with Christianity suddenly being the state religion of the Roman Empire, who of course were the Sasanians' perhaps foremost geopolitical enemy, this of course had a major impact on the Zoroastrian self-image. Being challenged intellectually by these scriptural religions, Zoroastrians realized that they needed to clearly establish a set canon of scripture and to collect those scriptures in writing, which they did.
I ain't gonna lie to you though, the Zoroastrian symbol It looks so nice. It looks so nice, bro. The Zoroastrianism looks so freaking clean, bro.
Experts and priests.
I don't know, man. I just think it looks
were also
nice.
given an increasingly high status at this time. In this period, the high-ranking religious clergy were often known as a mobed. The fire temples became wealthy institutions, and the religious clergy were very close to the king and his court, thus playing a role in politics too. This can be compared to the increasingly important role of bishops in the Roman Empire. Some of the highest ranking people of the clergy, the high priest or Mobad and Mobad, the priest of priests, became famous in their own right as very powerful men with significant power, such as Kerdir and Adurbad. Connected to all of this, there was also a concerted effort to more clearly delineate what the Zoroastrian orthodoxy was. As we have seen, Zoroastrianism historically, while retaining some basic Avestan features at their core, could be quite varied in different ways. But here in this period, we see a strong conscious effort of getting rid of heterodoxy and perceived heresy. For instance, the Sasanians authorized what basically amounts to a kind of iconoclasm. All images of the Azadas that were found in temples around the region were destroyed and instead were replaced by fire altars. So the temples to the Azadas were kept intact, but the images themselves were replaced by fires. Fire and fire temples became the main center and focus of worship to the Sasanians, with the symbolic function of the fire we talked about before being kept in mind, of course. Similarly, there had appeared at this time certain interpretations of Zoroastrian doctrine that were deemed heretical and were thus also counteracted. This includes what is known as Zurvanism, where the concept of Zurvan, or time, was seen as the highest principle in reality. Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu in this system being two equal beings being born from Zurvan as sort of sons of Zurvan. There was also Mazdakism, which some have compared to a kind of quasi-communist social movement within the religion. Now, both of these movements, Zurvanism and Mazdakism, are so fascinating. They probably deserve episodes of their own where you can focus more particularly on them. I have hopes to do those episodes in the future. But in any case, there were clear sort of attempts, clear efforts at this time to get rid of all these, what was seen as heretical cults, heretical interpretations of the religion. And thereby, through getting rid of these heterodox views, establish a sort of unified, true Zoroastrianism. And aside from the collecting and canonization of the sacred Avestan scripture, this was also done through new original texts and scriptures that clarify the doctrines and interpretations of Zoroastrianism, sort of according to this orthodoxy, so to say. These new scriptures were all written in the language known as Middle Persian, so this is a further development of the old language. So it'll probably be good to put up on the screen a kind of...
I got a question for y'all. How do you understand this? This is an alphabet, right? How do you understand this? This just literally just looks like gibberish. I genuinely like how where I see some symbols, but like this genuinely just looks. These all look the same. These it looks similar. How do you genuinely like read this and think, okay, this is that? Like, how do you read this properly, bro? Like, where are the letters at? Like, where's the spacing and what? Like, it just looks all the same. I'm looking at this. I'm like just trying to comprehend, like, because with English, right, or hell, or Eastern European language, or any European language. I could say really and truly, it's like you could clearly see the letters, clearly, right? So it's like, okay, I don't know how to read it, but I could clearly see the letters. But with this, it genuinely just looks like gibberish, bro. Like, someone please answer that.
Chronology of language. So the Persian language is divided into these different periods. We have Old Avestan, which is the oldest. Again, we said this is between maybe 1500 to 1000 BC. This is the very earliest Zoroastrian scriptures, like the Gathas, for instance, are written in this language. Then we have the Young Avestan, so from 1000 to 500 BC. Also some of the most significant scriptures, the Avestan scripture, are in this period and written in this evolution of the language. Then from 500, from the Achaemenid period, we have what is known as Old Persian, again a further development of this language, which is then replaced in this period in the ADs, what is known as Middle Persian, for the sort of Sasanian period. And then from usually a good dividing point here is Firdausi's Shahnameh, which was written, I think, in the 11th century. That's the start of New Persian, which is basically the language that is still spoken, the official Persian in Iran today, right? It comes from that. So that is the chronology of the different languages. And at this point, we're talking about new scriptures written during the Sasanian Empire, which would have been written in Middle Persian. This includes the very important works called the Bundahishin and the Denkard, although at least part of these books may originate in the early Islamic period. Much of the details and interpretations that we know about cosmology and the great cosmic drama that we talked about earlier is greatly dependent on these Middle Persian texts in particular, thus serving as key sources for Zoroastrian doctrine despite being such late compositions. In other words, even though the religion had technically existed for thousands of years before this, it is in this period that it becomes more clearly defined, codified, and institutionalized, probably as a classic example of defining oneself in opposition to the other. Because at this time, again, we see the emergence and prominence of many of these other religions, both inside and outside Iran, such as Christianity, often also in the case of Christianity, as the very religion of the political enemy. And so there's an effort to sort of define more clearly what Zoroastrianism is supposed to be in opposition to the other, right? These other movements and religions. And indeed, while the level of tolerance varied from ruler to ruler, this is also a period when we often see the oppression of religious minorities, such as Christians, Buddhists, and Hindus, on part of the Zoroastrian clergy and royalty. Critique was aimed at these other religions as, quote, deaf, blind, and deceived by the Devas or Ahriman or Angramainyu. And we see cases where the temples and idols of other religious groups, such as Buddhists, Hindus, and others, were destroyed. For example, the famous high priest Kerdir that we mentioned earlier says in an inscription that, quote, while Ahriman and the Devas were punished and rebuked, and the teachings of Ahriman and the Devas departed from the empire and were abandoned. And Jews, Shramans, Brahmins, Nazareans, Christians, Maktak, and Zandiks in the empire were smitten, and destruction of idols and scattering of the stores of the Devas and God's seats and nests were abandoned. And in kingdom after kingdom and place after place, many divine services in magnificence and many Varahan fires were established, and many Magi became happy and prosperous, and many fires and Magi were imperially installed. But we should, of course, remember that this attitude wasn't true across the board. Many rulers of the Sasanian Empire were quite tolerant of different groups living in their realms too. And looking more broadly, the Persian rulers, especially those of the Achaemenid dynasty, such as Cyrus the Great, were generally known across the board as tolerant, merciful, and wise. So we should see these things more as signs of the times rather than as an inherent aspect of the religion itself. Religions, as we know, are always what its practitioners make them out to be, and thus change and evolve depending on how it is performed in different times and places, no one form being more true than any other, at least from a neutral academic standpoint. Whatever the case, this dominance of Zoroastrianism was to become significantly altered with one of the most dramatic events of late antiquity or early Middle Ages, namely, of course, the Arab conquests at the advent of Islam.
Oh no, copyrighted music. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Skip.
Which were very successful, partly because of the weakened Sasanian army after long. It was with these sudden invasions of the Arab armies beginning in the 630s, which were very successful, partly because of the weakened Sasanian army after long periods of war with the Byzantines, that the landscape of Greater Iran and Central Asia was to change forever. But this topic is often over-sensationalized too, and from both fronts. On the one hand, you have people saying that the Muslims completely decimated the Zoroastrian population, forcing them to convert or die and destroying nearly all the fire temples and Zoroastrian buildings. On the other hand, you have people saying that the Arab conquests and Islamic takeover were completely without any such violence or destruction at all. And, of course, neither of these two extremes are true. Generally, after the conquest, the Zoroastrians were considered...
You know, it reminds me of how people imagine European colonialism. Yeah. People tend to imagine European colonialism more if the extremists of Europeans went, came, destroyed everything, blah, blah, blah. And that's not really exactly true. That's not really exactly true. But it was also just like, oh, I came here and, you know, set up shop here. Like, no, that also isn't true. Like, it wasn't like peaceful as well. It was more like in between.
Considered among the so-called people of the book, the Ahl al-Kitab, and were obliged to pay the jizya tax just like Christians, Jews, and other groups. This meant that they fell under the category of dhimmi, and they and their sacred places, including temples, were technically protected under Islamic law. In theory, as long as you paid the tax, you were exempt from military service and were equal to Muslims in society. Of course, in actual practice and reality, things were often quite different. But it is true that generally...
So, hold on a second. You're telling me, because I see so many Muslims in my comments tell me, swear to me that, oh, it was the Muslim conquest. Oh, they treated their conquered people so good. As long as they paid their taxes, they were exempt from draft, and they gave me this whole perception that it was sunshine and rainbows. Right, as long as they paid their taxes, you were basically a privileged citizen. No, I just played devil's advocate and I just took that face value. But yeah, he said here that in practice was not the case. So basically, I was lied to by my Muslim audience. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, really and truly. Honestly speaking, thinking about it now, it's like, yeah, throughout history, that's always been the case. It's like, yeah, on a piece of paper, this is so, and so, especially in a time period like this. But in practice, things were much different. So, I'm pointing this out because literally had like so many people. Every time I point out how the first caliphate was a colonial empire, how it treated its subjects that weren't Muslim, right? People were like, oh, but the jizya tax though, it made people privileged if they paid a jizya tax and they didn't have to fight in the military. And they swore that was the case. So, I love to hear the explanations. I need some very valid explanations for that. Because seriously, going in my comments and saying that, the Muslims respected people who paid the jizya, and then for him to say that wasn't always the case, that wasn't really the case in true practice, I really would love to hear some explanations on that.
During the Umayyad Caliphate, the Zoroastrian population continued to flourish. And those that had been in power previously were kept in their positions, only now, of course, under the higher authority of the caliph. Forced conversions didn't really happen, as the Umayyads had a policy of basically not wanting any non-Arabs to convert to Islam for various reasons.
What the hell?
With the advent
racism
of the Abbasid dynasty, things started to change a little bit.
Racism!
Especially from the rule of the Caliph al-Mutawakkil and forward, more strict rules regarding the status of dhimmis were enforced in the empire. So, in this period, several fire temples were destroyed or converted to mosques and many other such things. And even though the treatment of dhimmis waxed and waned and changed depending on who was in power and in what period, groups like Zoroastrians were to some degree always second-class citizens and had to withstand oppression from time to time.
Of course.
For these reasons, many people would start converting to Islam, making the Zoroastrian population dwindle more and more. but they did remain a significant presence for a long time until at least the invasion of the Mongol armies. And this decimated much of the Zoroastrian world that remained at that time. So we should recognize that history is less black and white than we are sometimes taught. Zoroastrians remain.
Yeah, I know that. A lot of you people watching don't. Although, granted, if you've made it this far in the video, you probably have enough of an attention span to, I hope you do, to know that. But some people just don't know that, and it's annoying as hell.
In the region and were allowed to continue worshipping for the most part, but at the same time, there is no denying that there were periods of oppression and general second-class treatment of the Zoroastrians under the many of the Islamic dynasties. So much so, at least, that many chose to either convert to Islam or to move elsewhere, basically. Most of them going to India and would then make up the Parsi community, which still stands today. But many Zoroastrians remained in Iran too and went through periods of persecution under the Safavids, as well as more positive periods, such as during the late 19th to 20th centuries. The Parsis in India are very significant.
Oh my goodness, I would love to hear what. Yeah, bro, because literally people in my comments literally legitimately said, oh, the Islamic caliphates were so tolerant of other people of different faiths. Really? Oh, okay, what's this? I'm just repeating what I read in my comments. Okay, people swore that the Islamic caliphates were so tolerant of other faiths. Which I knew was cap. I knew that was cap. This is why I said in my previous video, loads of people from loads of Muslims in my comments, they love to glaze, bro. They love to glaze anything from Islam. Anything from Islam. Even when it's clear that's not the case. Like, they love, like, the meat writing is crazy, bro.
They seem to have established themselves at a very early date. Some say that the Parsis sort of fled or emigrated from Iran sometime in the 8th or 9th centuries, and then they have established themselves as a very prominent Zoroastrian community all the way until today. Now, because they have been in India over all these centuries, they, of course, developed unique practices because of that region and because of that sort of, at least in periods, lack of contact with their Zoroastrian kin in Iran. And today, actually, the Parsis are the community. It's the largest community of Zoroastrians in the world. In some periods, they've also been seen, even by the Iranian Zoroastrians, as a kind of the guardians of the true faith. And many priests from Iran sort of traveled to India to learn from the Parsis because they had preserved many of these scriptures and traditions to a larger degree than had been possible in Iran, right? So the Parsis are really, really important, and they deserve an episode of their own too. I make my mention here about them more brief than it perhaps should be, but keep in mind the Parsis are very important for this story, as they have been the most, in terms of population, the most significant, the most populous Zoroastrian community for centuries at this point. So now that we have a basic understanding of the teachings and cosmology of Zoroastrianism, as well as a good understanding of the basic chronology, so where it originated and how it has developed over the different periods and empires and so on across history, now we can sort of start to dive into the actual practices of Zoroastrianism. So what does Zoroastrianism look like to a regular person? How is this religion practiced on a day-to-day basis? Well, we should first look at one of the most long-lasting aspects of Zoroastrianism, which is the liturgy known as the yasna. We mentioned this briefly in the beginning of the episode. This is a rather complex ritual liturgy performed by priests daily. This is always in the morning and can take several hours. The yasna liturgy takes place in the fire temple and involves the preparation of the sacred drink known as hauma, and in ancient times at least also involved animal sacrifice. Today, this latter aspect is represented only by the clarified butter that is consumed with bread. The ritual also involves things like water and a focus on purity, much like the rest of Zoroastrianism. But one of the main aspects of the liturgy involves reciting the hymns and scriptures that make up the yasna in terms of the yasna as a collection of liturgical scriptures. So the yasna is a ritual that is performed daily by the priest, but the word yasna is also used for the recitations, the scriptures that is recited during this ritual. The yasna in total consists of 72 sections with varying types of styles. It is, for example, in this yasna collection that we find the 5 gathas, those earliest writings attributed to Zarathustra, as well as other hymns, the yashts, and other early Zoroastrian compositions, many of which were probably preserved because of its use in this daily yasna liturgy. So we probably wouldn't have I shouldn't say probably, but it's possible that we wouldn't have the gathas, that they would have survived if they weren't used in this very important ritual. That is probably a key reason why they were preserved for so long. After all these sections are recited with the actions associated with them, the liturgy ends with a, quote, offering to the waters. This ritual has been very important for the Zoroastrian worldview. It is believed that this is one of the most effective and important ways that we humans strengthen Asha and help it become victorious over the darkness in the world. As for regular lay people, Zoroastrianism involves daily prayers. To be precise, there are 5 daily prayers to be performed over the course of the day. The scholar Mary Boyce describes the prayer like this, quote, "First, the believer prepares himself by washing the dust from face, hands, and feet. Then, untying the sacred cord, he stands with it held in both hands before him, upright in the presence of his Maker, his eyes on the symbol of righteousness, fire. Then he prays to Ahura Mazda, execrates Angra Mainyu, flicking the ends of the cord contemptuously as he does so, and reties the cord while still praying. The whole observance takes only a few minutes, but its regular repetition is a religious exercise of the highest value, constituting both a steady discipline and a regular avowal of the fundamental tenets of the faith." As you can see, fire plays an important role not just in the temple, but for the individual practitioners as well. And the cord that she mentioned is also a very important part of Zoroastrian practice. This is known as a kushti, and it's a cord that is worn around the waist by all invested or initiated Zoroastrians. This initiation ceremony that Zoroastrians go through usually takes place for kids at age 15. The kushti is made of 72 threads, representing the 72 sections of the yasna liturgy that I mentioned earlier. Another key aspect of Zoroastrian practice is the seasonal festivals that take place annually. The main ones are 7 in number, 6 of them collectively being known as Gahanbars. And they are, and excuse the pronunciation here, Maidoi Zaramaya, mid-spring, Maidioi Shema, midsummer, Paitishahia, bringing in the corn, Ayathrima, the homecoming, Maidiairia, midwinter, and Hamaspath Medaya, which has unknown meaning. As you can tell, with the exception of the last one, all these festivals celebrate the different seasons and things like harvest. They also represent the 6 Amesha Spentas, aside from the 7th, Spenta Mainyu, which is identical to Ahura Mazda, as we said before. The 6th of the one mentioned, the last one, is not directly connected to the calendar year, but is rather a celebration of the so-called Fravashis. So finally then, we have to tackle this topic. What is a Fravashi? Honestly, this is one of the more complex and difficult concepts in this religious system because it's kind of unlike anything we recognize from other religions. The Fravashi is like the higher self of a human being. So before we are born, we sort of live with Ahura Mazda in his world as Fravashis, almost like divine being ourselves. But when we are born, our soul becomes separated from the Fravashi and travels down to this world to gain experience and knowledge and to help strengthen.
Okay. That's how I always imagined it. Is like, yeah, this body that we're in is just nothing more than just a mortal body. Nothing more, nothing less. Our soul is indestructible. Well, unless God decides that he wants to change that. Yeah. When you really and truly think about it, yeah, like this body is And it's even more freaky because your brain doesn't feel pain. It's only your body that feels pain. So think about that for a second, right? I tried to explain this before. I just think the brain is just a projector, basically. You know how when you project something, you have a source, and that source basically like travels to the projector, and the projector projects, you know, it, right? I just think that's what the brain is, and the brain is just, you know, just interpreting everything, you know, that's being projected to it. Probably why actually, light, when you think about it, you need light. Like without light, you're blind as hell. Because again, I just think the brain is something like a projector, and you know, when you block a projector, you don't see nothing. If that makes sense, it's hard to explain, but that's why I feel like when the brain is like, you know, you kill the brain, it's like, well, because guys, what is the body for? All the body is doing is just keeping the brain alive. That's it. Everything else in your body is there to assist with that process. Your eyes need to see food. Why? Because you need to eat. Your digestive system is just there to, again, keep the brain alive. Your heart is just there to keep the brain alive. Your hands, you need some way to get food, right? And drink water, right? Your feet, you gotta move around. When you genuinely think about it, that's all your body's there for. It is literally just one giant freaking group project to just keep the brain running, and that's it.
Asha, for example. But we are still in contact, so to say, with our Fravashi, our higher self, and once we die, we will reunite with it. And the Fravashis became an important part of the religion, often being revered or even worshipped in themselves, particularly Fravashis of Ashavans, or important people and ancestors of the past. And that perhaps most common symbol for Zoroastrianism, the winged being that we find in so many ancient inscriptions and thumbnails for YouTube videos, is, at least according to most, a Fravashi. Some have believed that it is a depiction of Ahura Mazda, but this seems unlikely given the fact that Ahura Mazda is very rarely depicted in image. So the jury seems to be out still on exactly what this symbol is, and it might have symbolized different things in different periods, for example, but mostly it is known as a Fravashi. In any case, the 7th yearly festival stands apart from the others in some way. It doesn't represent a single Amesha Spenta, but represents fire itself, that force which, at least symbolically, lies at the core of all the Amesha Spentas, being their, quote, pervasive life force. This festival of fire, which also often serves as the Iranian New Year, is known as Nowruz, literally meaning new day. Nowruz takes place every year on the spring equinox and appears to have been, in a way, the most important and popular of the festivals. Indeed, even though Zoroastrianism hasn't been the majority religion in Iran for many centuries, the celebration of Nowruz is still very prevalent among its people, both in the region and in diaspora communities, and for different religious denominations in the region too. There are elaborate ways of practicing this festival and still serves as an important day for Iranian and Central Asian people around the world.
That's cool.
Lastly, another famous aspect of Zoroastrian practice that we should mention involves their burial customs. If you remember when we talked about fire, we said that this natural element is seen as pure and thus representing light and goodness. And there has been a huge emphasis on not polluting things like fire and water in any way. For this reason, things like cremation of dead bodies
with water is like, okay, yeah, but fire, like what?
Has been completely out of the question for Zoroastrians across history.
Oh, bro, look, am I the only one who doesn't want to be cremated? Let's be real here, folks. Bro, I thought about that before, and I'm like, bro, what if you could feel that and no one doesn't know? I'm just saying, man. I don't know, like, dude, or just the idea of just being in a coffin. It's like, yeah, you're dead. Hopefully you're out of that body at that point. That's all, dude. That's all I hope. That at that point is I'm out of that body. I don't care. It's like, who cares? Screw that body. Right? Based on most people's experiences that unironically died and came out to life, it's like two ways, right? It's either I had an out of body experience or I saw nothing. That's literally like what people describe. It's one of those two. I had an out of body experience, I went to the afterlife, or I just saw nothing.
Would, of course, pollute the pure fire with dead human flesh. And death, of course, being one of the main symbols and results of druj and angramainio, of evil and this decay in the world.
This is what I...
Instead, the Zoroastrian custom has been what is known as a sky burial. There often existed dedicated places known as dakma, or towers of silence. These were often located far away from humans and pure things like fire and water, and dead bodies would be taken here. They would be left out in the open for vultures to consume the carcass. When this process was over, the bones were sometimes collected and then put in a sort of proper grave. The reasoning for this, as we said, is that dead human bodies are impure. They are a part of the druj aspect of the world, and one can thus not let that come into contact with pure things such as water, fire, and even earth, making any other kind of burial kind of inappropriate. This practice and the Towers of Silence has indeed become one of the most famous aspects of Zoroastrianism to the wider public. With that said, it's also true that many Zoroastrians, especially in diaspora communities, will bury their dead in cemeteries. And you know, there's probably an interesting discussion or video to be made about the internal conversations about those kinds of practices, how that is justified, how one adapts to new situations in diaspora communities, for example. But, you know, just putting that out there, that many of these customs that were maybe prevalent in ancient times aren't always necessarily practiced by Zoroastrians today. So that is a general overview of Zoroastrianism, its teachings, history, and practices. As you can tell, this is a deep and complex religion that really needs a lot more time to cover fully or properly, but I hope that this has given you a better understanding of the tradition and maybe inspired you to do further research on your own. Now, one of the most widely discussed aspects of the Zoroastrian legacy is, of course, its relationship with the other religions, particularly the Abrahamic ones. Indeed, Zoroastrianism is probably one of the most important and influential religions in history, and sometimes indirectly. I'm sure many of you, as I've gone through their teachings, have recognized many aspects from religions that are more popular today, and this is an important and significant point. The general dualistic cosmology with a clear idea of good versus evil, represented by a good god and his lower divine beings on the one hand, and an evil demon and his minions on the other, of course reminds us a lot about the theologies of religions like Christianity and Islam, and their concepts of God and angels versus the devil and his demons. Furthermore, the eschatological teachings about a final judgment, where the dead will be resurrected and, based on their actions in life, will be sent to either a paradisial life or an eternity of agony. This is essentially identical to teachings of Christianity, at least parts of Judaism, and in Islam. Even the particular teachings about the bridge that must be crossed, which to evil people becomes thin like a blade's edge and causing them to fall down into hell, we find almost direct parallel here in Islamic lore. So what is going on here? Well, we should remember that Zoroastrianism was a major and important religion in the ancient world, represented by one of the largest empires in history. During the period of the Babylonian exile and afterwards, the Jews were often in direct contact with Zoroastrians and generally seems to have quite liked them. The Bible basically has nothing but good things to say about the Achaemenids, even calling Cyrus the Great Messiah for allowing the Jews to return to Judea. And indeed, it is after and during this
I didn't know that
contact that we see Israelite literature such as that of apocalypticism, where many of these eschatological and theological ideas appear for the first time, including the concept of Satan or the devil, as well as the Day of Judgment and heaven and hell. It is thus quite probable that Zoroastrianism in some way had a direct impact and influence on these major religions of the world and their teachings. Even aspects like the Seoshant, the sort of savior figure, in Zoroastrianism, there's actually multiple Seoshants usually, so it's not like there's just one savior figure, but this idea of a savior figure that will come partly at the end of time to instigate or to be part of this reinvigorating of the world, making it good again, of course, has been used by many Christians as being a kind of prophecy that talks about the coming of Jesus, and that this is sort of a messianic concept in some way that also sort of made its way into Judaism and Christianity. So there's a lot of these different concepts that are very similar to the Abrahamic traditions. But we should also remember that things aren't black and white, and that this isn't a one-way street. Zoroastrians in antiquity lived in close proximity with Christians, Jews, Mandaeans, Hellenes, and many others. And it's quite likely that just as Zoroastrianism influenced them, so they also influenced Zoroastrianism in turn, impacting the way that that religion was shaped, especially in periods like during the Parthian and Sasanian empires. However we choose to look at it, there's no denying that Zoroastrianism plays a very important role in the history of religion and philosophy. It serves as one of the oldest surviving religious traditions in the world, and one that has changed and evolved over the millennia. From the Gathas of Zarathustra, some of the oldest religious literature in the world, all the way until today, Zoroastrians have shaped our world. They still make up a significant community, even if they aren't as prominent as they used to be. The largest community today are, again, the Parsis living in India, but there are also significant communities in Iran, in Europe, and in North America. Estimates
North America?
Around 100,000
Just North America? I never heard of these people. What the hell?
in the world today, but the actual numbers are often thought to be significantly higher. I hope this has been an interesting and educational, hopefully entertaining episode on Zoroastrianism. If you want more content...
I already say entertaining, but it was intriguing enough to the point where I was able to keep paying attention.
Like this, then you can...
Plus, I was forced to watch all this. It's a reaction video.
Leave a comment.
All right, look, man, you made it all the way here to the end of the video. If you have any suggestions to me, for me, by me, look, man, before you leave, let me say something, right? You see these like super long videos, like I said at the start of the video, I'm okay with it for now. For now. But as I get more viewers, as I get more subscribers, slowly but surely, things will change. It's like, you know, if you want me to react to like some longer stuff, it's like you're gonna at least have to, you know, become a channel member, or at least send a donation, quite frankly speaking. Because again, this is time here. This is probably like 2 hours here, right? Right now, it's okay. It's fine. But I'm just saying, you know, in the near future, or the future in general, because I don't really plan on leaving this channel anytime soon. No. No, this channel will expand eventually. You know, that's like my time there, right? But anyways, make sure you like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions to me, comment down below. Go check out my other reactions on my channel. I have plenty of reactions, especially if you like my reactions. Go binge my stuff. You know, thank you for watching, man, and goodbye.